Why you lose what matters most. We all know the sting of loss, the job that slipped away, the friendship that faded due to neglect, the brilliant project abandoned just before completion. But there is a deeper, more chilling form of loss, the kind we orchestrate ourselves. Look closely at the things that have vanished from your life, the things you truly valued. How many were taken by sheer accident, and how many were quietly, meticulously undermined by your own hands? This is the profound, unsettling paradox of the human condition. We are architects of our own devotion, yet simultaneously, the most efficient saboteurs of our deepest desires. We spend years building a foundation of trust, only to test its limits with needless suspicion. We cultivate a rare, fragile intimacy, only to shatter it with a single, aggressive withdrawal. Why do we push away the very light we seek? Why does the urgency of our need seem to translate into an urge to destroy the source of fulfillment? Consider the cycle. You find a sense of purpose, a discipline, a routine, a creative endeavor that brings genuine meaning. For a time you nurture it. It demands consistency, vulnerability, the quiet commitment of the self. Yet, just as the roots begin to take hold, a sudden, powerful emotional wave hits. Perhaps it is fear of success, fear of exposure, or simply the gnawing discomfort of sustained effort. And in that moment of emotional urgency, you make a choice that feels protective, but is in fact corrosive. You ghost the opportunity. You pick the fight. You seek the immediate distracting comfort, sacrificing the long-term, profound reward. We often mistake intensity for depth. When we are deeply invested in something, a person, a path, the prospect of losing it due to external forces becomes terrifying. And so an unconscious primal strategy kicks in. If I destroy it first, I control the pain. If I make myself unworthy, I preempt rejection. If I abandon the structure, I avoid the responsibility of maintaining it. This is the core inquiry of our contemplation today. The loss of what matters most is frequently not an accident of fate, but a poorly calculated act of preemptive surrender. We are driven by a subtle yet powerful instinct to manage future suffering by inviting present failure. We will explore the architecture of this internal sabotage, the psychological mechanism that makes us choose the familiar pain of self-inflicted loss over the terrifying uncertainty of open-hearted vulnerability. We are not just victims of circumstance. We are sometimes the zealous, misguided guardians of our own smallness, ensuring that nothing too large, too beautiful, or too essential can ever be taken from us, because we refuse to truly possess it in the first place. This journey requires radical honesty, a willingness to see the strategic retreat hidden within the emotional outburst. Let us begin by naming the very thing we seek to understand, moving beyond the simple concept of failure and into the complex terrain of self-deception. This is the quiet war waged within the soul, where preservation is confused with destruction, and where the pursuit of safety guarantees the experience of lack. The philosophical concept that illuminates this destructive pattern is what we might term the paradox of anticipatory grief. It is an elaborate, non-rational defense system that operates under the assumption that the pain of inevitable loss is maximized only when we are fully invested and unprotected. To mitigate this future, unbearable pain, the subconscious mind initiates a slow, controlled demolition of the valuable object or relationship, ensuring that when the external force inevitably arrives, or when the relationship naturally shifts, the emotional stakes are already lowered. We are essentially grieving the potential loss before it happens, using self-sabotage as the tool of emotional divestment. This mechanism is fueled primarily by two powerful, interrelated forces: emotional urgency and profound neediness. Emotional urgency is the demand for immediate, total resolution or validation. When a relationship or a project reaches a stage requiring patience, sustained ambiguity, or quiet, unrewarded effort, the urgent mind panics. It views the lack of immediate confirmation, the silence, the distance, the necessary space, not as a natural phase of growth, but as an existential threat. This urgency compels us to force a conclusion, often by creating a crisis. We pick the unnecessary fight to clear the air, when in reality we are forcing the other person's hand, demanding a guarantee of permanence that life cannot offer. The resulting argument or withdrawal is the controlled demolition, the proof that the foundation was fragile all along, satisfying the subconscious need to be right about the inherent instability of things. Neediness, on the other hand, weaponizes vulnerability. We seek profound connection, but the moment that connection truly deepens, we become terrified of the dependency it creates. A healthy relationship requires interdependence, but the needy self interprets interdependence as a potential trap, a loss of autonomy. To regain the feeling of control, the needy person will often push the other away, creating distance precisely when closeness is most required. This is the ultimate act of self-preservation, proving that you can survive without the thing you cherish most by ensuring you have to survive without it. The loss, in this context, is not a failure of connection, but a desperate, though misguided, success in maintaining a perceived, isolated self-sufficiency. We sacrifice the richness of shared existence for the sterile safety of solitude, perpetually losing the vital things because we cannot tolerate the weight of their importance or the fragility of their existence. This complex internal logic reveals that our deepest losses are often monuments to our most sophisticated fears. To understand the philosophical weight of this self-sabotage, we must turn to the thinkers who grappled with the burden of freedom and the management of existence. Søren Kierkegaard, in his exploration of anxiety, offers a powerful lens. For Kierkegaard, the human experience is defined by the terrifying freedom of choice. When we commit fully to a purpose, a relationship, or a discipline, we are simultaneously choosing not to choose a million other possibilities. This commitment creates a profound existential anxiety. When we lose what matters most through self-sabotage, we are often attempting to escape the responsibility of our choice. If the relationship fails because I destroyed it, then the burden of maintaining its perfection or enduring its inevitable struggles is lifted. The failure becomes a form of relief, a retreat from the overwhelming potentiality of a life lived fully and bravely. Friedrich Nietzsche offers another perspective rooted in the concept of resentment. While resentment typically involves projecting blame onto external forces, a subtle form of internalized resentment can fuel self-destruction. When we strive for something monumental, a great career, an exceptional love, we implicitly accept a high standard. If the effort required feels too immense, or if we fear we might fall short, the ego, unwilling to admit weakness, turns its destructive energy inward. Instead of accepting the inadequacy of the effort, we attack the object itself. We declare the goal not worth it, the partner too demanding, or the opportunity too complicated. By diminishing the value of what we are losing, we protect our ego from the shame of genuine failure or sustained inadequacy. The loss, therefore, is a desperate attempt to maintain internal superiority by externalizing or neutralizing the source of our aspiration. Furthermore, the existentialists, particularly Simone de Beauvoir, teach us that authentic existence demands accepting the ambiguity and fluidity of the world. Our self-sabotage is often a refusal of this ambiguity. We want guarantees. We seek certainty in love, permanence in success, and immunity from change. When the reality of life presents its inherent precariousness, we reject the whole structure. We prefer the neat, predictable narrative of "I messed up" or "it wasn't meant to be" over the messy, open-ended truth. This is beautiful and I might lose it, and that is terrifying, but I must commit anyway. The act of losing what matters most, when self-inflicted, is thus a philosophical refusal to live in the present tense of commitment, opting instead for the defensive comfort of fatalism. We lose the things we value because we cannot bear the weight of their living, breathing, uncertain existence. How does this philosophical architecture manifest in the practical daily fabric of our lives? The pattern of self-sabotage is most evident in the tension between urgency and sustained commitment. Consider the artist who begins a revolutionary piece of work. The initial inspiration is pure urgency, a burst of creative energy. But to finish the work requires months of grinding labor, self-doubt, and consistency. Just as the masterpiece nears completion, the artist suddenly develops a debilitating block, or perhaps picks an unnecessary fight with their most supportive critic. The loss of momentum, the abandonment of the project, is not a lack of talent. It is a retreat from the terrifying finality of completion. Finishing means being judged, being exposed, and most terrifyingly, having to start something new. The self-sabotage guarantees a safe, unfinished status where the work remains perfect in potential, never flawed in reality. In relationships, this pattern is often seen in the testing behavior. A deeply committed partner begins to feel profoundly safe, which ironically triggers the defensive mechanism. The feeling of safety is interpreted by the anxious mind as a prelude to abandonment. To test the reality of the bond, the individual initiates a high-stakes conflict, often over a trivial matter, or exhibits behavior they know is destructive. If the partner leaves, the subconscious is validated. I knew it was too good to last. If the partner stays, the self-saboteur is temporarily relieved, but the behavior is likely to escalate, requiring increasingly destructive tests. The loss of trust, the erosion of patience, and the eventual dissolution of the relationship are direct results of prioritizing the immediate, urgent need for validation over the sustained, quiet commitment required to maintain mutual respect and security. We sacrifice the durable structure of happiness for the fleeting drama of emotional certainty. We lose what matters because we demand proof of its indestructibility, and that demand is itself the most destructive force. Now we must turn this critical lens inward. To break the cycle of losing what matters, you must first identify the specific signature of your own retreat. Where in your life do you consistently build walls where bridges are needed? When an opportunity for genuine growth or intimacy arises, what is your immediate, instinctive response? Does it involve withdrawal, attack, or the creation of distracting chaos? This is the moment for radical, quiet honesty. Reflect on your most significant losses over the last 5 years, not the losses imposed by external tragedy, but the ones that felt like slow, internal collapses. Were they preceded by a period of intense neediness or a sudden, overwhelming fear of vulnerability? Try to trace the emotional timeline. Often, the act of self-sabotage is not the failure itself, but the response to a moment of success or profound connection. Did you quit the disciplined routine the day after you hit a major milestone? Did you undermine the relationship immediately after a deeply intimate moment? The destructive impulse often arrives not in times of despair, but in moments of profound, terrifying hope. Ask yourself, what am I trying to protect? If I fully embrace this relationship, this purpose, this discipline, what is the worst-case scenario that my defensive mind is trying to preempt? Is it the pain of abandonment, the shame of inadequacy, the exposure of my true, imperfect self? The cost of this protection is the perpetual loss of the very things that give life meaning. You are paying an emotional premium for safety that guarantees you will never truly inhabit your own life. Genuine self-awareness requires recognizing the strategic brilliance of your own fear, how cleverly it disguises destruction as defense. Only when you see the pattern, the preemptive strike, the controlled demolition, can you begin to disarm it. Our journey through this paradox reveals a final, essential insight. True preservation of what matters is not found in defense, but in brave, open-hearted commitment. The things that bring the most profound joy, deep love, meaningful work, inner peace, are inherently fragile. They exist in the realm of the uncertain, requiring continuous, vulnerable investment. When we attempt to protect them by forcing certainty or by preemptively withdrawing, we destroy the very life force that sustains them. We cannot save a bird by crushing it to prevent it from flying away. The key to keeping what matters most is recognizing that the fear of loss is a natural, healthy response to value, but the action driven by that fear, the self-sabotage, is the only true guarantee of loss. Recovery begins when you choose to lean into the discomfort of vulnerability, accepting that the deepest connections carry the highest risks, and that a life lived fully is a life lived without guarantees. This means tolerating the anxiety of sustained effort, allowing the relationship to breathe without demanding constant reassurance, and accepting that completion is better than perfect potential. The ultimate act of self-preservation is not the guarding of a small, isolated self against the world's potential pain, but the courageous expansion of the self to encompass the world's uncertainty. We stop losing what matters when we redefine ownership. We do not own the relationship. We own the commitment to be present within it. We do not own the outcome of the project. We own the dedication to the process. The things that matter most are not objects to be possessed and protected, but living processes to be nurtured and risked. And so, the final question remains. Are you willing to trade the sterile safety of preemptive surrender for the magnificent, terrifying possibility of full possession? The choice is not between safety and danger, but between a life defined by loss and a life defined by courageous presence. We have charted the landscape of preemptive retreat, identifying the psychological blueprints of our self-inflicted losses. Now the crucial work begins. The quiet, meticulous excavation of your own internal scaffolding. To interrupt this cycle of self-sabotage, you must first pinpoint the specific, hidden identity you are desperate to protect. For many, the greatest resistance to success or profound happiness comes not from fear of the unknown, but from fear of losing the known self. The person whose narrative is built around struggle, inadequacy, or perennial misfortune. Consider the profound discomfort that accompanies sustained well-being. When life is flowing, when a relationship is secure, when discipline feels effortless, does an internal alarm bell sound? This feeling is the ego of the struggling self resisting obsolescence. If you become the person who is genuinely happy, successful, and secure, who then is the old familiar you, the one who constantly battles, the one who is always almost there, the one whose story grants them permission for small failures? Self-sabotage in this light is often a desperate act of narrative consistency, a way of ensuring that your future remains congruent with your painful, yet predictable past. The question is not simply, what am I afraid of losing? But rather, what familiar suffering am I unwilling to relinquish because it defines who I am? Crucially, the destructive impulse is often cloaked in the language of practicality or necessity. We rarely admit, I am destroying this because I fear true connection. Instead, we employ sophisticated rationalizations. When you abandon a promising endeavor, what euphemisms do you use? Is it, I just needed a break, when in reality, you sought a permanent escape? Is it, the timing wasn't right, when the truth is that the necessary commitment felt too vulnerable? When examining a fractured relationship, did you frame the withdrawal as setting healthy boundaries, when it was actually a fear-driven rejection of intimacy? Identifying these linguistic decoys is essential, for our self-deception relies heavily on dressing up fear as wisdom. Pay close attention to the moments when the most valuable thing in your life begins to feel like a burden or too much effort. That is often the precise moment your self-preservation mechanism is preparing to jettison it. Furthermore, this internal sabotage is meticulously woven into our daily habits, often manifesting as a singular, subtle compromise that sets off a chain reaction. Think back to the last time you lost a valuable routine, be it exercise, creative writing, or meditation. The loss did not happen in one dramatic collapse. It began with the decision to skip one session, rationalized as necessary rest or reward. This single compromise was the breach of the levee, the quiet decision that signaled to your subconscious that the commitment was conditional, not absolute. The subsequent loss of momentum was merely the natural consequence of that initial, small, destructive choice. Pinpoint that initial, seemingly insignificant concession. What was the exact thought that preceded the first retreat? This threshold moment is where you hold the power to choose a new trajectory. Perhaps the most challenging introspection involves confronting the deeply rooted belief in your own capacity for joy and deservingness. Many individuals operate with an unconscious internal ceiling, a limit on how much success, love, or peace they believe they are fundamentally worthy of sustaining. When life exceeds this self-imposed limit, the system panics, initiating self-sabotage to return to the familiar, safer altitude of emotional scarcity. Now, reflect. When you achieve a significant victory, do you immediately look for the flaw, the catch, or the reason it will inevitably fail? Do you feel a pressure to undo the good fortune? This is the signature of the internal ceiling at work. True inner reflection requires you to question not only your fear of loss, but your fear of having, your readiness to accept grace, abundance, and the sustained weight of profound happiness without feeling compelled to shatter it. Moving beyond the dramatic failures and high-stakes anxieties, we must now scrutinize the quieter mechanisms of sabotage, those triggered not by crisis, but by the insidious inertia of comfort. Reflect on those times when life was not painful, but merely fine. When a relationship settled into a sustainable, if unspectacular, rhythm, or when your professional life achieved a steady, respectable plateau. It is precisely in this state of good enough that many people initiate the retreat. The human spirit, perhaps biologically programmed for struggle or novelty, often mistakes the absence of conflict for the absence of life. Consequently, we unconsciously introduce discord, a manufactured crisis, an unnecessary complication, to escape the perceived banality of sustained tranquility. Consider the profound need to feel alive, which often overrides the more difficult, quieter need to feel fulfilled. We sacrifice the enduring architecture of happiness for the momentary intensity of chaos, breaking things merely to prove we still possess the power to feel deeply. Delving deeper into the roots of this internal ceiling, we uncover the powerful, often invisible influence of inherited belief systems. Your capacity for sustained joy or success is frequently capped not by your own fears, but by the unwritten scripts absorbed during your formative years. Examine the collective narrative of your family or community. Did financial security always precede a sudden, devastating reversal? Did profound love inevitably lead to tragic loss? If the narrative you internalized suggests that great aspiration is always punished or that lasting happiness is inherently unstable, your unconscious mind may function as a loyal guardian of that script. It initiates sabotage not out of personal weakness, but out of a misguided loyalty to the belief system that kept your ancestors safe within their perceived reality. This is not a personal failure. It is the difficult work of dismantling an inherited philosophical framework that deems genuine, sustained flourishing an unacceptable risk. However, the internal sabotage is often more subtle than outright destruction. It frequently masquerades as necessary self-care. It becomes essential to distinguish between the restorative actions that sustain your commitment and the indulgent escapes that dismantle it. How often do you use the language of "I deserve a break" to justify a week-long lapse in discipline that ultimately annihilates the momentum of months? True self-care is the maintenance required to keep the engine running smoothly. It fortifies the foundation. Self-indulgence, when habitually chosen over effort, acts as a solvent, eroding the very structure you claim to value. This requires rigorous honesty. When you choose comfort over commitment, are you truly restoring your energy for the next difficult phase? Or are you merely escaping the responsibility that the current phase demands? The latter choice ensures the loss of what matters, framed deceptively as compassion for the self. Furthermore, the fear extends beyond the self and into the communal sphere, the terror of unrecognizability. When you commit fully to a path that brings genuine success or transforms your character, you inevitably become a new person. This evolution can trigger immense resistance, born from the fear of losing your social moorings. What happens if you genuinely achieve a profound transformation? Will your old friends still understand you? Will your family relate to your new values and priorities? Often, we subconsciously sabotage our ascent, be it professional or personal, to remain legible, predictable, and familiar to our established social circle. We trade profound personal evolution, the chance to inhabit a more authentic self, for the comfortable, static security of belonging to a group that only knows the old version of us. The loss of a goal, in this context, is a desperate attempt to preserve social identity. Ultimately, the core of this reflection rests on authenticity. You must discern whether the things you are losing were goals you truly desired, or if they were merely aspirations driven by external performance anxiety. Are you losing momentum because you never wanted the endeavor authentically, only because it looked impressive or checked a societal box? Conversely, are you losing things you do want because the effort required exposes a painful gap between your current capabilities and your ideal self? The distinction is vital. If the desire is performative, the loss is merely a necessary correction. But if the desire is genuine, the sabotage is a tragic self-betrayal. Only by acknowledging the difference between genuine desire and performative striving can you identify the true trigger of your retreat and begin the difficult, necessary work of aligning your actions with your deepest values. Building on this understanding of defensive mechanisms, we find that self-sabotage often operates not as an emotional impulse, but as a cold, albeit flawed, calculation of risk management. Now, consider the inverse of the familiar sunk cost fallacy. We are typically warned against persisting in a failing venture simply because of past investment. Yet in the realm of preserving what matters, we frequently engage in a preemptive divestment strategy. We look at a flourishing relationship or a high-potential project and calculate the immense emotional capital, the time, the hope, the vulnerability, already invested, and project the catastrophic pain of its eventual, inevitable failure. Consequently, the subconscious mind decides that the future pain of total loss outweighs the present joy of commitment. To minimize the final blow, we initiate a controlled, strategic retreat, sacrificing the asset now to cap the emotional expenditure. This is a deliberate, albeit irrational, attempt to regain emotional solvency. By initiating the breakup or abandoning the discipline, we prevent the investment from becoming too large, ensuring that when the external world eventually presents its challenge, we have already withdrawn our most sensitive assets. This complex financial metaphor of the soul reveals that we are often managing potential grief like a volatile stock portfolio, choosing to sell off high-value holdings at a discount rather than risk a market crash. Furthermore, this calculated retreat is heavily influenced by the crushing force of the immediate, a phenomenon we might call the tyranny of the instantaneous. Sustained commitment to anything meaningful, a career, a profound love, demands patience, toleration of ambiguity, and the acceptance of delayed gratification. However, the human nervous system is wired for immediate reward, the quick dopamine hit that validates effort. When the sustained effort yields only quiet, slow growth, the mind finds the immediate relief of quitting, of distraction, or of chaos far more appealing. Consider the difference between the focused labor required to finish a manuscript and the effortless scroll through digital noise. The self-saboteur chooses the immediate, low-effort comfort of the scroll, sacrificing the profound, delayed satisfaction of the completed work. The loss of momentum, therefore, is not a failure of will, but a surrender to the brain's preference for the path of least resistance, trading lasting fulfillment for momentary ease. Another crucial layer is the profound fear of irreversibility. When we commit fully to a specific path, marrying a partner, accepting a defined career trajectory, finishing a specific creative work, we simultaneously close the door on an infinite number of alternative futures. This closure is often perceived as a loss of potential, a death of the phantom self, the idealized, limitless person we might still become. We destroy the tangible, actualized good in the present, the real, loving partner, the established, successful career, because its very existence limits the mythological perfection of our unactualized future. By sabotaging the present opportunity, we keep the door ajar for a vague, perfect possibility that exists only in the realm of fantasy. This is the tragic exchange of the certain, achievable good for the illusory, unattainable perfect. Ultimately, self-sabotage serves a deeper, more insidious cognitive purpose. It is the mechanism by which we seek to validate our pessimism. If we truly believed that happiness, success, and stability were possible, we would pursue them without reservation. But if our deepest, most internalized assumption is that all good things are inherently fragile, temporary, or undeserved, then the greatest internal comfort comes from proving that assumption correct. By causing the failure, by creating the crisis, we gain the bitter, self-fulfilling satisfaction of intellectual validation. The goal shifts from achieving happiness to proving the impossibility of lasting happiness. Consequently, the loss of what matters most becomes a strange form of psychological victory, a confirmation that the world is exactly as painful and unreliable as we always suspected. Breaking this cycle requires a radical willingness to be proven wrong, to risk the terrifying possibility that life, and you within it, might be capable of sustained, genuine flourishing. Drawing these complex strands together, we recognize that the architecture of self-sabotage is not merely a collection of isolated impulsive acts, but a highly sophisticated, albeit profoundly misguided, survival strategy. We have mapped the terrain where preservation and destruction become conceptually indistinguishable, where the urgent need for validation orchestrates the very loss it seeks to prevent. The cumulative insight is that the deepest crisis we face is one of internal misdirection. We are using the tools of control to manage variables that demand surrender, and employing strategies designed for defense in a territory that requires open-hearted engagement. This intricate webbing of anticipatory grief, defensive retreat, and the protection of a struggling identity creates a closed system, an existential terrarium where nothing truly wild or magnificent can thrive. The implication of this defensive posture is the forfeiture of our full presence. By perpetually managing the potential pain of tomorrow, we ensure that we never fully inhabit the joy, the labor, or the uncertainty of today. We become experts in managing the shadow of loss, thereby guaranteeing that the substance of fulfillment remains perpetually out of reach. The sterile safety of the self-imposed limit, while comforting in its predictability, is ultimately the most profound form of imprisonment. Consequently, the true sacrifice we make is not the loss of a specific object or relationship, but the continuous erosion of our capacity for sustained, open vulnerability. Every preemptive strike, every calculated withdrawal, reinforces the subconscious belief that the world is too precarious for genuine investment. We trade the rich, messy reality of committed existence for the brittle, manageable narrative of, "it wasn't meant to be." This internal calculus, always favoring the familiar discomfort over the terrifying possibility of radical, unearned joy, sustains the cycle. The moment we reach the threshold of true flourishing, that internal ceiling, calibrated by fear and inherited doubt, is violently enforced, pulling us back to the safety of our established level of lack. Reflecting on this profound irony, we see that the desperate grasp for ultimate control is the very action that renders us powerless over our own fulfillment. We mistake the ability to destroy for the power to create, confusing the fleeting certainty of self-inflicted failure with the enduring strength required for persistent, vulnerable commitment. This realization demands a fundamental shift in perspective. The challenge is not to eliminate risk, which is impossible, but to embrace the inherent fragility of all things valuable. The work ahead is not about trying harder, but about dismantling the elaborate protective structures that have been designed to keep us safe from life itself. As we pivot toward the final reflection, the path forward becomes clearer, albeit daunting. It requires a radical acceptance of the exposed self, one willing to stand in the open field of possibility without the armor of rationalized retreat. It asks us to recognize the seductive lie of the instantaneous and to honor the quiet, slow demand of sustained dedication. The answer to losing what matters most is not found in a new strategy of possession, but in a profound reformation of our relationship to risk, value, and commitment. It is time to look beyond the architecture of fear and consider the foundation of courage required to finally hold and keep the things we deeply cherish. The journey through the architecture of self-sabotage brings us to a singular, unifying truth. The things we lose by our own hand are not casualties of weakness, but monuments to a profound internal misunderstanding of safety. We have mistaken the maintenance of a small, predictable perimeter for the act of living, sacrificing the immense landscape of genuine fulfillment for the sterile, manageable terrain of preemptive failure. The core tragedy is that our most zealous attempts at emotional preservation, the controlled demolition, the strategic retreat, are precisely what guarantee the very scarcity we desperately seek to escape. We become masters of the exit strategy, experts in the art of the rationalized withdrawal, ensuring that nothing too valuable ever stays long enough to demand the terrifying vulnerability of our full, unguarded presence. To break this cycle, we must embrace a radical philosophical redefinition of courage. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the willingness to feel the fear of loss, that deep existential anxiety that accompanies true value, and yet choose commitment anyway. It means recognizing the anxiety of sustained happiness not as a warning sign to retreat, but as proof that you are finally inhabiting a space worthy of your whole self. The true practice begins now, not in grand gestures of defiance, but in the quiet daily commitment to resist the seductive comfort of the self-fulfilling prophecy. When the internal alarm sounds, signaling the need for immediate, destructive certainty, the courageous act is to pause, breathe, and choose the ambiguous, difficult continuation. This sustained commitment requires dismantling the internal ceiling that dictates our perceived worthiness. We must consciously choose to tolerate the discomfort of being proven wrong about our own pessimism, to allow ourselves to be happier, more secure, and more successful than the inherited narratives permit. This demands a profound act of self-loyalty, prioritizing the creation of an authentic future over the desperate preservation of a familiar, struggling past identity. The things that truly matter, love, purpose, mastery, do not thrive under the pressure of anxious scrutiny or the demand for guarantee. They flourish only in the open air of trust and ongoing, vulnerable investment. The final insight, then, is this: you cannot protect a living thing by treating it as if it were already dead. We stop losing what matters when we choose to meet life not as a hostile force requiring constant defense, but as a continuous invitation to participate, fully and without reservation, in the creation of our own meaning. The deepest form of self-preservation is not found in controlling the outcome, but in embracing the process, accepting the inherent fragility of all beauty, and choosing to love, to strive, and to build, knowing that the richness of the experience far outweighs the pain of any potential loss. It is in this courageous, open-handed commitment that the cycle of self-sabotage finally dissolves and the possibility of enduring fulfillment takes root.